Dobré popoludne, vážené dámy, vážení páni. Po niekoľkých mesiacoch sa vám opäť prihovárame zo zážitkového centra Aurelia v Bratislave. Som Tatiana Vavrová, som editorka Forbesu a budem vás dnešným podujatím sprevádzať. Toto podujatie Slovenské diskusné CEO Forum
Slovak CEO Discussion Forum has been traditionally organized in cooperation with PwC. But quite untraditionally, this one is a virtual event, but still we are quite convinced that today's discussion is going to be as interesting, as contributory and beneficial as the previous one. And of course, we'll be also giving away the prize of the most respected CEO of Slovakia. Now, let me introduce Kristiana Serugova, head partner of Tax and Legal Department of PwC. Kristiana, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Tatiana. Good afternoon again to all of you. Let me welcome you online, the guests here in the studio and you who are watching online. PwC has been organizing CEO survey every year globally and always presents the findings of the survey at the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. And then every year, this is the 11th year already, so this is a post-10th anniversary. In cooperation with Forbes, we organize a CEO discussion forum where we analyze the insights and observations that you, CEO leaders, CEOs of Slovakia, and of course the differences between the perspective of the Slovak CEOs and international global CEOs. This year, we didn't manage to organize the discussion forum in Davos, because of the pandemics. Davos was organized in the early February this year. So we decided to organize this in the autumn date, and we thought it would be a good idea to ask you again the questions that we put you in the standard survey in January, so that we can see in today's discussion and the survey not only compare the Slovak versus global survey, but also the development of your perspective and your observations and your sort of viewpoint of the Slovak economic reality and the difference between January and September this year. So this is also a big thank you to more than 100 respondents from your ranks who answered our questions again in September, because we added some questions related to pandemics. We were asking you about what was the most surprising thing for you, what was the biggest problem, the biggest challenge, and we are truly interested and we look forward to the insightful discussion. We're going to have very interesting guests in our panel discussions today. And once again, let me welcome you on behalf of PricewaterhouseCoopers to today's discussion forum. And now let me give over the floor to Tatiana. Thank you, Kristiana. Before we get through to the panel discussions, I think we should thank our partners, without whose support today's event could not be organized. Partners are HB Reavis, Asset, and Volkswagen as well. And their model, the latest ID3 model, can be seen in the studio just behind our backs. And to briefly introduce you, ID3 model. This vehicle starts a new era in Volkswagen. It's a fully electric vehicle that this brand, Volkswagen, wants to make a true household name, to make e-cars closer to masses. The sale of ID3 stars these days, and just an interesting fact, fun fact if you like, you can configure this vehicle online with a few clicks only, and we need to thank also to the networking partner of this event, and that's Nespresso. So we'll be very, very soon we'll be back with the first panel discussion. Thank you. Okay, we're back with the first part of today's program, the first panel discussion. But before I introduce our guests, I'd like to inform you about the possibility of interaction. Despite the fact that this is an online event, it's truly interactive. You can join us through Slido application. And if you're watching us, you probably see on the right side of your user interface the possibility where you can directly type your questions. You don't even have to log in or register. So we'll be very happy if you take advantage of this option and to interact with us. Gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Michal Horváth, Head Economist and Director of the Section of Economic and Monetary Analysis, Currency Analysis of the National Bank of Slovakia, and Peter Krutil, the CEO and General Director of Slovenská, sporiteľňa. So I wanted to introduce you that you are representatives of macro and micro economics, even though it's difficult to talk about micro segment in Slovak National Bank. Nevertheless, we'll be talking about what's going on in our economy, how the economy is doing as a whole, how the financial sector is doing as a whole, and what the financial sector can do for the economy, what it does and what it can do further on. So, today's most recent, or the biggest breaking news of today, the recovery plan has been published as of today. So, let me first ask you, Mr. Horváth. I'm not sure if you had any time to study or go through the recovery plan. So what's your first take? Well, obviously I did have some time to look at the longer document. I did not study the document in detail. There was not enough time for that. But I mean, as a first reading, I'd say this is an intriguing shopping list of measures and ideas. I mean, anyone can find their own favorite measures. It somehow also overlaps with our ideas as the National Bank of Slovakia. What really matters is the implementation, and perhaps before that, some sort of political selection, because there are too many measures in there, so there probably is going to be some short list. I do understand this as some sort of formulation by analysts. Fair enough. What should be done in the country, but we will have to prioritize. We will have to push agenda ahead, and this is going to be the task for the political level, and this is ahead of us. For those of you who didn't have time to find out any details, the Ministry of Finance introduced 8 areas today where major reforms should be implemented, and major improvements. It starts from fiscal reforms through digitalization. I will not go into every single area. Mr. Krutil, did you watch the press conference? Well, I did take a look at it. I mean, during the day, I also, thanks to the fact that I was going here to this discussion forum, so obviously I did expect that you're going to ask me about this. 8 is a nice number. I mean, 8 areas is good, but I have to agree with Mr. Horváth over here that it's a document which is very, very long, and I do understand this is an open document, and it actually asks the professional public for any comments or amendments, and if something is missing. And I believe now it's going to be about us, the practical side, the business, and then of course to get in touch with the authors of the document and to somehow get this ahead constructively, because I can imagine that this document will kickstart, it will trigger a huge volume of discussions, and I think it's going to be several busy days in relation to this document. And I have to agree with Mr. Horváth again that execution, the implementation is something that will get us ahead, not really talking about what's missing, what's not missing. I mean, I think we really need to get behind the table and start moving, because there's not enough time in terms of the economic cycle. We don't have enough time in terms of the political cycle, because the ability to implement reforms in these political cycles is getting smaller and smaller within those 4-year election cycles, and the economy really needs stimuli, and those who want to find stimuli will find them there in document. But we need to say that despite the expectations, the plan which was introduced is truly really a working document, and it's going to be finalized between October and April. So these following months are going to be truly interesting, as the minister pointed out himself. If we wanted to implement the whole plan, it would cost 30 billion, but we will have around 6 billion. So there's certainly going to be some slashes. National Bank of Slovakia last week introduced its own priorities last week, if I'm not mistaken. Which was the most essential for you personally? Well, for me, judging from my background, I've been teaching at foreign universities for quite some time, and I would like to see finally one really good university that is competitive from international perspective. So when I was going through the document, one of the first things that I noticed were the plans in the field of university education and science. And when it comes to other priorities, in Slovakia we have a huge challenge with marginalized communities, and this problem has been neglected for so many years. It's a politically difficult topic, but I think this is a key issue from the perspective of a long-term development of this country. So that's another, let's say, a close topic to me. I mean, close meaning like this is an urgent situation, it's emergency. Mr. Krutil, what do you think is the most essential thing to do? Something that needs to be done quickly and something that would have real impact, the low-hanging fruits. Well, I would divide this into... it's very difficult if you have just a couple of minutes to give us a silver bullet. No, well, I'll try to put it from my perspective. From the short-term perspective, I believe that it's the labor cost of labor, which has been rising dynamically in this country. And in this COVID and post-COVID period is going to be a very important area, and this could help the economy. What I liked about the plan is that those things should be implemented while maintaining relatively high fiscal discipline, which is good. And I agree, in the long term, education and healthcare, I perceive these two areas as critical in this country. And last but not least, and I think I have to point this out: change of infrastructure. Infrastructure meaning roads, the traditional infrastructure. Because I personally believe that since we want the economy to be digitalized, the country needs to be digitalized as well. We need to get it to a higher level, sort of digitalize the state administration, the public administration, and last but not least, rationalization or efficiency of operation of the public administration. Yeah, these are the endless topics. Yeah, timeless topics, I said. Do you believe that the plan is sufficiently ambitious? It's a question for both of you. Mr. Krutil, maybe you can start with you. I refuse to answer here. I don't want to evaluate this. It's an open document. It's not closed. I don't want to say whether it's ambitious enough or not. It's not my task to evaluate it. From my perspective, what I'm bothered about is that there's too many things. I would select just a few priorities that are really relevant, very important, and get these ahead. Because personally, I believe we do this also in the day-to-day business. If you focus on too many priorities, you try to do everything and you manage nothing. So it would be very important to prioritize the portfolio and then push these things ahead meaningfully with real steps. Mr. Horváth, the same question for you. Are we ambitious enough in terms of how we want to transform the country? Well, when you look at the document, the first reading tells you that there are these various parts and they are in various levels of detail. And some parts have been prepared in great detail. They are very ambitious. For example, when it comes to fiscal policy and long-term sustainability, that's why I didn't mention it as one of the priority areas, because there we can see that there are some ideas There are specific plans, there's some sort of push. But in other parts, we read that there are various strategies and concepts are going to be shaped and formed. So you can see that we are very far away from specific results. So over there, in these parts, I would expect more ambition, much more ambition than just shaping of strategies. So let's get ahead. This is a very unusual year for the economy, I'm sure you will agree. So let's start with the National Bank of Slovakia. So how is the economy doing this unusual year? Well, it's not doing fine. Perhaps I don't need to analyze this in great detail, but yes, we are experiencing a record-breaking downfall in the second quarter. The economy fell to levels, unprecedented levels and unprecedented fall. And of course, this recovery in the third quarter was really strong, well, thanks God. But I have to say that the second quarter was surprisingly good. I mean, we expected it would be much worse. I mean, during when the quarantine was, at the height of its. Why was it? Automotive. Perhaps, and the global trade in economy, so the global trade in the world worked better. I mean, the past crisis resulted in a much worse crisis of the global trade, which is very bad for open economies like Slovakia. But in Slovakia also we were surprised by people as consumers, households, because while their foreign counterparts, households in Europe or across the world, experiencing the crisis, they started to save money very strongly. They stopped consumption. In Slovakia, the households didn't start this very much. Actually, there was much higher consumptions than expected, household consumption. And the improvement of our forecasts last week was exactly the result of this. It's not about the future, it's rather about the positive surprises from the past. When it comes to outlook, we are equally careful. And we have reasons to be careful. Obviously, now we already see that the second wave is here. The second wave of the pandemics, not only in Slovakia but also around the world. So this certainly calls for greater caution. So this recovery, V-shaped recovery, is not happening. Well, we do believe it is happening, but it's a prolongated V, if you know what I mean. So we still hope that the measures adopted over the autumn, winter and spring perhaps will be soft, which will support this shape of recovery. If anything similar happens then in spring, then this would have to be very complicated. We would have to look for other letters from the alphabet. Do you expect that something like this is going to happen? Well, in the pessimistic scenario we do, but of course we need to have various predictions. So pessimistic scenario we also have one pessimistic scenario, and we've incorporated also this sort of measures. The picture says that the economy would somehow stopped at the level of this year, so we wouldn't see much growth the next year, which is a very negative scenario. Of course, there are others as well. Mr. Krutil, in your analysis, do you expect this to happen as well, that there will be very strong lockdown on the economy? Well, of course we need to expect, or we need to anticipate various other alternatives. I mean, you cannot rely on a single scenario. So naturally we have several scenarios, several outlooks. I believe if someone told me that in March and April that the economy would be doing as fine as it is doing now in September, October, I would say that I would take it immediately as a good outcome. I mean, the V that we've seen and that we are seeing, V of the economic recovery and economic growth, is very good. What we see is that the months of the lockdown, the number of payments within the economy, especially when we talk about households, fell by 20%. But now we are on the levels from before the crisis. So, and I believe that this is mainly thanks to the consumption of the population. We are on the figures which are better than before which are as good as before the crisis. So people are optimistic, yes, and I think we've discussed also with the National Bank of Slovakia. We look at the people who ask for a stop of repayments of mortgages and credits, and out of these total number, only 10% seem to be defaulting. So it's approximately 1.5 of the whole retail portfolio, which doesn't seem to be as a tragic figure. I mean, it's not fun, but it's not so tragic. I mean, the defaulting credits represent under 3% of the whole bank portfolio. So if we add 1.5% to 3%, we will around 4.5%. So 4.5% of default credits and loans. This is the level of the surrounding countries in the V4. So it's not a tragedy. So looking at the retail clients, the situation is relatively okay. It's quite good, and I hope that we ain't going to see an economic lockdown, because we are learning how to live with COVID. Of course, the healthcare sector is very important, but it seems that it's quite obvious now that we must not impact the economy. I mean, so to want to make sure that the lockdown doesn't impact the economy as it did in March and April. Of course, the open nature of our economy and the level of international industry, that's a totally different story. There, the situation is, well, so far is relatively good. When I look at the performance of our clients, large clients, the question is how these clients will look like when the government starts to slow down or turn off gradually these assistance, these support, subsidies. Whether there was enough support or not enough support, that's a totally different story. I think we can't discuss it at the moment, but when our clients will start to return to their original condition without the supporting measures, that's a question. How? What's your expectation? Well, it's a $1 million question. If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here. I would be doing something else, perhaps. I personally hope, and I think, that the situation will slightly decline. It will be slightly worsened, because this COVID measures, they basically protect some companies from restructuring, debt restructuring. So when these companies receive the support from the government, they have to maintain the number of employees, etc., etc. And I believe that next year, that is the optimistic scenario, companies will try to improve their position in the new reality, which will be the COVID reality. And from this perspective, I think that we will see some corporations, some restructuring measures that will have maybe short-term effects on employment or short-term effect on increasing of the unemployment, but I don't expect this to be tragic. So to summarize this, I say so far so good, but we need to be very cautious, because the months that will show the real outcome of the crisis are ahead of us. And we don't see the exact figures, because everybody who's in trouble, they ask for the stop of the repayment, and we don't see those figures, but we'll see the beginning of next year. Yeah, exactly. Beginning of next year will show the true situation. So let's look at the slide. This is a question from Mr. Horváth. When the Slovak economy will be doing as fine as before the corona crisis? Well, according to our estimates, it should be in mid-2022. So it will take a few months. So the recovery will be slow. I mean, slower than the fall, which was very sharp. Yeah. What's the impact? What's the impact of the second wave of COVID on the Slovak macroeconomy? Can you already estimate the second wave impact? Well, as I said, we already involved or incorporated this slight second wave in our projections at home and abroad, and the result is that despite the improvement or positive surprise in the summer, for the future we expect the same trajectory from spring. So, gradual, slowed recovery until 2022 to the pre-crisis levels. And one more thing is important: the level that we've seen, the 2 or 3 year horizon before the crisis, it's not expected to be achieved. In a short-term horizon or a mid-term horizon. So we expect 3 to 4% losses where the economy would be if there had been no COVID crisis at all. What will be driver of the growth in the next years? Well, we are a small open economy, so it's we expect that it's going to be the recovery of our trade partners abroad, and this will be the major source of the stimulus for our economy. So the modern part of the Slovak industry should be recovering in relation to this. But there's a big question about some companies in this segment, but also the less productive part of the SMEs, domestic SMEs, how they are going to be recovering. That's the question. I think that this can be also the source of hope, that the recovery could be perhaps at this level, as here NBS mentioned, because the National Bank, neither has you didn't incorporate this recovery plan in our projections, and I believe that you don't have this incorporated we don't have it incorporated in our plan. So if you take a look at it, the bank sector and the corporate sector in the Slovak economy, there are credits of 22 billion, and now you have 6 billion in the economy. So it's 25% of all loans of all corporations in Slovakia, so which is around 70% of the economy. These were the figures. So what I'm trying to say is that this could be a hidden weapon, a positive weapon, which could really help the economy in the next 2 or 3 years in the recovery process. So the recovery process could be faster. Quite likely is going to be faster than without this injection. But as you said, the devil is in the details, so depends how the recovery plan is going to be implemented in real life. Yes, exactly. I just want to add one more thing. Yes, it's true that the recovery plan is not included in our scenario yet. The caution on our side is, I think, right. Also, other central banks are very cautious because at this time there's very few information how this plan is going to be structured at the European level and nationwide level. And in Slovakia, particularly, if you look at the history of drawing of EU funds, cohesion funds, etc., the time profile for this drawing, I wouldn't expect miracles here, based on the historical facts. So the government can surprise us nicely, they can, and then the development will be much more optimistic. So this is part of the positive scenario, the more optimistic scenario, but we don't expect this we don't take this for granted, certainly not at all. So we need to perform or implement reforms. We need to learn how to meaningfully use that money. Yes, meaningfully and quickly, efficiently. Time is of essence here. Okay, good. We have other questions. Mr. Krutil, which business sectors will have biggest trouble in coping with COVID, according to your experience? Well, very quickly, I think you're not going to be surprised. It's like Horeca segment, so hotels, mainly city hotels. Because in hotel business, mainly those who provide these holiday types of services, they perhaps experience a very difficult period this year. Tatras and this sort of destinations. Then, of course, restaurants, bars, and all this whole segment. Hospitality segment in general, and you just look at the structure of which industries ask for the moratorium of repayment. So this I think the construction segment is also going to be to go through a difficult period, and services like leisure time services, which the services where you expect people come together, which they can't today. So these are the most heavily impacted industries. We looked at these. We expected serious impact, a negative impact on the automotive industry, which didn't materialize. So this gives us hope, right? That the economy, the traditional economy that supports a major part of the backbone of Slovak economy, will continue driving us further on. What's the mood among the bankers when it comes to providing loans to corporates? Well, if I understand correctly what you're asking, I think it's quite good. Maybe Mr. Horváth can help me with figures. When it comes to corporate lending, not just our bank, but the whole banking sector is supporting their clients and will be standing by our clients. And most of the loans that went to the economy, and they've been growing in the several past years, they weren't based on state guarantees or the state support programs. They were based on real sort of figures. And the volume of loans, volume of corporate loans for larger corporate clients has been growing in the past months. So this is an area where we see healthy growth in the past 2, 3 or 4 months. I mean, what's your opinion, National Bank? Yes, financing of the corporate sector is doing quite well. I mean, the conditions are a bit stricter now, but when it comes to volumes of credit, corporate credit, there's been very decent growth. I need to blow our own trumpet, maybe also thanks to the measures adopted in the monetary policy. That's what I said. So anyway, but we need to say that with the state guarantees, this could be a little better. So the absence of state guarantees, mainly looking at the key sector of SMEs, some companies which could be provided a loan probably don't want to take a loan because the state is not willing to take over that risk on its shoulders. This would be probably quite helpful also for the future. So it's a question that we need to look at. We also want to ask about the taxation part of the Minister of Finance plan. What do you think about the anticipated changes in taxation of the recovery plan? I can comment on that. I think the minister said that he wants to shift the tax burden from taxation of labor to taxation of consumption and taxation of property and also taxation of externalities in relation to the environment. I believe this is a reasonable direction, and we've been talking about this for years. It is quite an essential change. No other Minister of Finance managed to do this, so we'll see. Mr. Krutil, sports and culture, we've been hearing about these sectors quite a lot, because people working in these sectors lost their jobs or lost their income. So what do you think about the government measures? Can banks help these? Well, I focus on what I can influence. So we as banks, we have been helping, we are helping, and we will be helping. The question is whether we can delete all these, or let's say whether we can cover all the shortfalls that we are witnessing. The shortfall, I mean the disappearing business as a result of the government measures or as a result of the pandemic situation. And this is a question that I cannot answer really. We are trying, we want to help, but the banking sector itself has been impacted by the corona crisis. So in principle, we are helping, but this help is cannot be as large as 2 or 3 years ago when the whole sector was healthy. So, to summarize this, you seem to be more optimistic than the situation shortly after the first wave. I hope this applies to both of you. You hesitated a little, or we'll have to wait until mid-2022 to get to the pre-crisis levels of the economy. Banks continue providing credit and loan, but they are cautious. They are more cautious. We've been always cautious, but now we're a bit more cautious. Okay. And one more. What would be your conclusion? How would you conclude this? I mean, what should we expect? What can impact us? What can help us? What would be your key plus and key minus? Or key strength and key weakness? I see 3 factors that will essentially influence the economy. I mean, if we talk about the horizon of 3 to 6 months, right? So the short-term horizon, it's very difficult to predict further. Or, I mean, it's very difficult to predict how the disease will influence the sort of mid-term horizon, whether the vaccination will be available, whether the whole global economy will start running, and movement of people across the continents, etc., etc. So, on my behalf, I'm quite convinced that the unemployment will remain stable, which means that a major part of the people who lost their jobs will again have the chance to get a new job, and personal consumption will be one of the drivers of the economy, and that the figures will remain at least as they are now in terms of personal consumption or household consumption. At the moment they are I think 3 or 4% when it comes to retail turnover. So personal consumption. Second thing, I believe that our neighbors will be doing fine. We are a small open economy, so we see a relatively optimistic development in Germany, the biggest trade partner, and also other neighbors around us. They seem to be doing relatively well so far, so hopefully this will materialize in our foreign trade, in our exports. And thirdly, I do believe that the chance provided by the situation, let's be honest, we have a chance to use those money from the EU funds or from EU structures. There are these TOTRO programs. So I'm convinced that we as a country will be will use this money meaningfully, and this will be a major factor in mitigating of the negative impact, which certainly is here to come. This is not over. Mr. Horváth, would you add? Yes, we are hopeful looking at the new generation EU program, or the recovery plan as we call it. Also when it comes to measures that were presented today, we are slightly concerned of the crash between the economy and reality. So the first 6 months of the next year are going to be very, very important in terms of the recovery of the crisis, from the crisis. Thank you very, very much, both of you. Now we're going to look at the short video with the major findings of CEO survey conducted by PwC and Forbes, and we will be talking about these in the following 2 panels. Thank you.
V januári 2020 tretina CEOs na Slovensku očakávala v tomto a nasledujúcom roku recesiu alebo krízu. Ich očakávania týkajúce sa vývoja ekonomiky vo svete dosiahli na prelome rokov rekordný pesimizmus. Pred pandémiou sa vyjadrilo 10-krát viac CEOs než pred 2 rokmi, že svetová ekonomika sa spomalí. Recesia visela vo vzduchu, ale nebolo jasné, aká bude a čo ju spustí. Po rekordnom pesimizme sa strojnásobil podiel CEOs, ktorí očakávajú zrýchlenie rastu globálnej ekonomiky. Optimizmus teda prichádza, ale v zásade zmenených podmienkach. CEOs sú teraz optimistickejší, aj čo sa týka rastu tržieb svojich spoločností. V septembri 84% lídrov na Slovensku veľmi verí a trochu verí, že ich firma porastie. V januári to bolo len 71%. CEOs na Slovensku veľmi pevne veria, že ich spoločnosti zvládnu zabezpečiť bezpečné pracovné prostredie, udržať si talenty, riadiť pohodu a morálku zamestnancov a zladiť potreby všetkých zainteresovaných strán. Ale už menej veria, že dokážu identifikovať nové príležitosti na získanie tržieb. CEOs na Slovensku plánujú najviac urýchlenie automatizácie a zavedenie nových spôsobov práce, zmenu bezpečnostných opatrení a požiadaviek na pracovisku a zlepšenie práce na diaľku. 38% šéfov firiem na Slovensku zvažuje odloženie alebo zrušenie plánovaných investícií v dôsledku pandémie. Spomedzi nich najviac zvažujú odložiť alebo zrušiť investície na kapitálové vybavenie, na počet zamestnancov a prevádzkové náklady. 62% CEOs na Slovensku nezvažuje odloženie alebo zrušenie plánovaných investícií a najviac plánujú realizovať investície do informačných technológií, prevádzky a digitálnej transformácie. Obavy CEOs na Slovensku sa za 3/4 roka zásadne zmenili. Pred pandémiou sa najviac obávali populizmu, zvyšovania daňového zaťaženia, daňovej neistoty a protekcionizmu. Dnes sa obavy najviac týkajú hospodárskeho poklesu, novej vlny infekcií a zníženia spotrebiteľskej dôvery. Globálny prieskum CEO z prelomu rokov priniesol poznatok, že firmy, ktoré vytvorili najväčší pokrok v oblasti zvyšovania kvalifikácie zamestnancov, dosiahli lepšie obchodné výsledky, vrátane lepšej podnikovej kultúry, vyššej produktivity práce a vyššieho rastu tržieb. Ľahšie si získavajú a udržia talenty, dosahujú väčšie inovácie a menšie rozdiely v želaných a dosiahnutých zručnostiach zamestnancov. Lídri s vyšším pokrokom vo zvyšovaní digitálnych zručností zamestnancov vo svete potvrdili vyššiu angažovanosť, viac inovácií a lepšie šance pritiahnuť talenty.